Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. It's episode 2676 of The Tom Woods Show, and I'm very glad to be talking to Jeff Degner today. Jeffery Degner is a guy I just met last week at the Mises Institute, and I read his book that you'll see on the screen right here, Inflation and the Family, Monetary Policy's Impact on Household Life. He is Dean of the School of Business and Innovation and a professor of economics at Cornerstone University. And Jeff, let me just say a couple of things about this. Well, in fact, the context for this is in a sense that beginning of last week, we kicked off the Mises University program at the Mises Institute, and I was the opening speaker. And one of the points I was making was that, I can understand some of the criticisms that, let's say Trumpian influencers might have of a certain kind of economist who really is obsessed with GDP and everything has to be subject to that, and all we care about is this number on a chart. But most of us aren't that way, or at least a lot of us aren't that way. And I think the pendulum has swung too far in the direction of the economists are a bunch of dum-dums who focus on dumb things when we have all these existential issues at stake. And, why don't they understand that they need to focus on this and that and the other? And I've just had enough of that. And the point of my talk was that, if you really do care about the things you say you care about, you're going to achieve your goals much, much better if you learn what good economists have to teach you. And if you don't, you're either going to get in your own way, or it's going to be a lot slower, or you're going to be at cross purposes with yourself. And it so happens that you have this book that amplifies everything I was trying to say, which is that if you're concerned about family life, their instincts these days are, well, we'll just have right-wing social policy instead of left-wing social policy. Well, how about undoing the bad things you're doing now? That's the lowest hanging fruit of all. So anyway, welcome to the Tom Woods Show after all that.
Thank you, Tom. And it was a real joy to meet you. And as you were delivering that talk on Sunday night, I was sitting next to some wonderful friends and colleagues. They're dear friends of yours, Peter and Sandy Klein. And as you were detailing your thoughts, they leaned over to me and said, he's talking about your book. You guys need to talk this week and get to know each other. And so it's really a joy and a thrill to get to meet you this way, but also last week during the best week of the year, Mises U. And another gentleman I was able to meet who's common friends, as we've talked about just a minute ago, was the series editor, David Howden. And David was a fantastic editor. This is a rookie effort for me as an author, and he had given a lot of sage advice in terms of being concise and what should go into a book like this and what should not. But one of the interesting things on this book, the title itself, it might be a little unclear by what we mean. And sometimes titles come out for publishing reasons and marketing reasons. But the real theme of this is the family in the inflation culture. And as you can see as a title, that might not be the most conducive to marketing folks. But that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about the long and steady inflation that's been a part of the U.S. economy and really the Western world in a post-World War II era. Now, what the book is not saying is that we're not saying that couples who are perhaps engaged are watching for FOMC minutes, and if Jerome Powell says something that they don't like, they throw up their hands and say, oh, well, I guess we got to delay the marriage for 2 years. That is not what this book is saying. What it is saying is that over time, we've had culture shift or change due to the fact that we have this positive, persistent inflation fueled by the Federal Reserve's policies, which have changed how we think about the future, how we think about what life will look like in 5, 10, or 20 years. And when it comes to making decisions around family life, whether it's marriage formation or certainly having children, these things matter. If we believe that our future looks like more work to pay our debts and so on and so forth, And these are some things that are part of the inflation culture. And there's much more to it as the book details. But as some folks might know, I'm a student of Guido Hulsmann, and his book, The Ethics of Money Production, has a phrase in it that has stuck with me ever since I read it. And he said that fiat inflation is a juggernaut of economic, social, and spiritual disasters. And this book really attempts to reflect on that, and especially as it applies to family life.
Let's start off with having you talk about what is meant by the term inflation culture.
Mm-hmm. And so when we think about this phenomenon, I took time in the book to break it down to three categories or three behaviors that have really become institutionalized. They've been baked into the way that we live in the Western world. The first area is that there's an increase in moral hazard, an increase in risk taking. We see this in the financial markets, where we have young people jumping into the crypto markets, young people jumping into the stock market at 16, 17, 18 years old and exploring these things, where the sort of old-fashioned ethics of working and saving some money and putting it away to grow in a more conservative sort of way, those have gone by the wayside. And this has increased that risk-taking, where students, young people, can have a lot to lose. So that's just one category where moral hazard has been baked into our culture. Another is, speaking of young people, is that rush into debt. A lot of times young people will ask me, well, when's the best time to buy a house? And if I'm being honest, the answer is yesterday, given the nature of ongoing price inflation in that market. The sooner you can get into that market, the sooner you'll be the beneficiary of the ongoing inflation in the housing market. And as you know, we discussed this at Mises U last week. This is causing a lot of tension between the generations, as older generations like myself or my parents have been the beneficiary class for ongoing house price inflation. And of course, this is to the detriment of younger people who are trying to break into the housing market for the first time. And with a median home price of around $400,000 or so across the country, we know that a 20% down payment, which is that good old-fashioned advice about how to enter the housing market, there's not too many young people, singles or couples that I know of, that have $80,000 ready to roll to enter the housing market at that median price. And so this rush into leverage early to build your credit score and so on is a part of the inflation culture. So those are just a couple of aspects. But another one, a third one that I highlighted and really has a strong connection to some of the existing literature on family studies, is rising income and wealth inequality. And this became a real important part of my book as I went back and looked at Charles Murray's famous book, Coming Apart. And for those familiar with that book, they'll know that Murray is noting how in the upper echelons of wealth and income in the United States, since the 1960s, traditional family life has, for the most part, retained its status. You have these folks who are able to get married, stay married, have the number of children that they desire, and have relatively stable marriages over time. They have a lower divorce rate than the rest of the population. Well, that's on the upside. Charles Murray talks about this group of people as living in a figurative place called Belmont. Well, for the rest of society who are really harmed by ongoing inflation, he uses this figurative example of Fishtown, people who live in Fishtown. And these are the folks who are not getting married at all. Young men especially are seeing more and more difficulty getting into a job market where they can provide for a family. You have a lot of cohabitation, a lot of children born out of wedlock, and divorce rates are much, much higher. And so what I came to a conclusion to in the book was that marriage has essentially been liquidated in that lower middle class and lower class because the things that we think of as being essential to marriage, a home and hope for the future, have largely been stripped from the losers in the inflationary environment. And so Charles Murray set out in his introduction and said, look, I'm just trying to explain what the situation is, but not demonstrate its causes. And he does take a couple of attempts at it. He talks about changes in the labor market, changes in the higher ed system, where he alludes to a hypothesis about why marriage has been liquidated. But I thought that was lacking. And so, again, the book explains that for your audience, the Cantillon effect, that'll be something that they're familiar with, that has occurred through our economy. Those who have benefited by Cantillon effects have maintained relatively stable family life. And those who have been on the losing side of it have not. And we've seen it disappear. And so that's the book in a nutshell, and what we mean by the inflation culture, and then starting to articulate a little bit how this has impacted family formation and fertility choices and so on.
So let's talk about that, because there are a lot of things that can happen that have some connection to monetary policy. Charles Murray focuses on the welfare state primarily, but that will influence people making these choices. And this is part of the point that I was trying to make, which is that if the Make America Great Again movement is concerned about the health of families, well, you think you're going to solve that problem without reference to economics, because economics is nerdy and it misses the big existential points, whatever. Spare me that. You think you're going to solve that problem without the tools the economists have, you're out of your mind. And looking at what is contributing to that. Now, obviously, rising house prices are going to, you would think, it's going to delay marriages, first of all, and postpone them off into the future. And the longer the decision to go ahead and get married is put off, the smaller the range of time that you're going to be of childbearing age. So there are all kinds of implications of just this one price in the economy, just this one price. But let me ask you a question, though, just to play devil's advocate. Couldn't you say that monetary policy that pushes interest rates low and pumps credit into the economy helps young people buy houses because there's a lot of credit available? There's low interest rates.
Well, one of the problems here with those low interest rates is that it's not only the housing market that young people are going into when it comes to credit expansion. One of the things I detail in the book here, alongside this, really two problems for young people, is the amount of debt that they're carrying into adulthood. So one of the areas we've seen credit expansion happen is in the higher ed market. So you've got these young people coming in. The ones that are getting married are the ones who have completed college and have a load of debt. So they already are facing some challenges in terms of that debt to income ratio. And so that is, they're already starting one step back as they enter into the housing market. And so for those people, they're coming to banks and they're going to have that really large down payment to, as I mentioned earlier. And some will say that, well, with more open credit markets, you can have more people enter this, gain higher credit scores. And so anytime you have these monetary or fiscal policies, even welfare policies that are designed to help everyone, what we find is that they help a slim, sort of marginal group who's just on the edge, where they will benefit, and the rest that we intend, or policymakers intend to benefit, they actually wind up suffering from this. So it is indeed the case that you have this small sliver of winners on the margin, but by and large, this has served to keep people from entering the housing market. And when it comes to that decision to marry and its relationship to housing, one of the things I found in the empirical research is really interesting. In the United States, it does seem like there's sort of a bi-directional relationship between home purchases and marriage. So it can be the case that some people who get married young and build a little bit of wealth do put themselves in better position to buy a home. And so what's different about the U.S. case as compared to some places overseas, like Southeast Asia, especially, in Southeast Asia, there's an explicit expectation in marriage markets that if you're going to get married, you will have already obtained housing or you can already afford it. And this is just a bridge too far for some people outside of the United States, where really expansive credit policies like those in Japan or South Korea have made housing unattainable for young people. And average age at first marriage in those parts of the world for young men has pushed beyond the age of 30. And young females are around the age of 28 to 29 in those cases. And so indeed, when you have credit expansion, opening of credit markets, there's a marginal group that'll benefit. But by and large, this is making things much more difficult, especially those who are looking to enter. And not only that, we see that it's that the rising cost of housing outpaces a lot of the other consumer goods that we see in the marketplace. And this is, of course, the nature of monetary expansion, right? Cantillon effects really are based upon when you have new credit expansion, there is that real element of human action. In other words, what is it that the person who receives new credit is spending their money on? And as it turns out, houses are where that goes first, and we see higher rates of price inflation there than in other sectors of the economy. So again, when we have monetary policy or fiscal policy, we've always got winners and losers. But by and large, we're seeing more losers, especially among the middle and lower classes, particularly in the housing market and particularly among the young.
Hey everybody, let's take a minute to thank our sponsor, Persist SEO. If you're getting buried by your competition online, then build your brand, your reputation, and your lead flow with digital marketing by Persist SEO. If you're a small local business trying to compete against large companies in the service industry, then increase your visibility with Persist SEO. What if you have low or no leads coming in on a consistent basis? Well, then website search engine and conversion optimization can help move the needle to a more prosperous business model for you. Are you tired of cold calling and networking? Use your website as a lead generation engine. What if you're not showing up for your services in the search engines? Well, get found with Persist SEO Expert Search Engine Optimization. All you have to do is call 770-580-3736 or visit them at ineedseo.help for a free website audit and consultation. That's 770-580-3736 or ineedseo.help. Well, now that I got my objection out of the way, let's get. I mean, obviously, the key questions initially would be about family formation and about fertility, and how these things are affected by debt loads, and how, in fact, how debt is influenced by the monetary system. Questions like that. That's what I'd like to get into, so that you talk about Gary Becker for a while. Maybe we'll get to him later. He's a Chicago guy,
right,
who offends everybody by the method he takes, because he applies this rational choice model to the family and treats it like a series of like legal interactions that don't seem to correspond to the way people think about it. So I don't want to make it seem like we're saying that people are sitting down saying, well, I'd like to get married, but the Federal Reserve has this policy. They don't necessarily think of it expressly, but I hate to sound like some doofus midwit, but quote, incentives do matter, and the Fed does create certain incentives.
Yeah, it does. And along with Becker's work, I mean, there's a lot to critique in Becker's work. And one of the things that was most astonishing about what he had to do in order to make his economic modeling and econometrics work was to make the assumption that adults' preferences don't change over time, over family life. And when you read these sorts of things, you know what you're dealing with. You're dealing with this sort of sterile kind of economics that, again, you pointed to in your talk at Mises U, that this is not the way to understand how real humans work in the real world. And so, yeah, there's plenty to criticize there in Becker. But another economist that sort of is on the periphery, but not far out of the Austrian circle, is Joseph Schumpeter. And Schumpeter has a passage where he talks about the mindset that people will adopt over time in an interventionist sort of economy. And in that economy, he says that people will begin to become sort of hyper-rationalized. They'll begin to think more and more about the hours that they spend in the labor force. For those who benefit from inflation, they'll begin to think more and more about the benefits that they accrue from inflation. Maybe they've got some extra yields and dividends on their assets and on their portfolio, so they're going to take that long vacation. They're going to, spend a couple months here and there where maybe kids are an obstacle to that. So Schumpeter talks about this kind of mindset, and he says that there can be a loss of the family motive. It was an interesting phrase in his book, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy. And so that really caught my attention. And again, I believe what Schumpeter was describing was a highly interventionist economy that had loads of fiscal and monetary interventions that over time drive us towards a more consumeristic, a more materialistic outlook on life. And when this is what sort of takes hold for adults in our mindset and in our way of thinking, then children become a little bit of a nuisance, dare I say. And no one comes out and says this explicitly. But as economists in the Austrian tradition, we want to look at human action. What are people actually doing? And delays in marriage, lowered fertility, which now we know is it clearly fits the definition of deliberate choice. Of course, setting aside the biological realities of conceiving and having a child, with legalized abortion, right? It is clear that having a child and bringing one into the world is a deliberate choice, and these actions have changed over time as we see this increase in materialistic, rationalistic, sort of consumeristic thinking. So much to the point, I didn't really bring this out in the book so much, but it is the case that young people have, in some cases, substituted children with pets. We see them taking out health insurance and talking about being dog moms. We have our oldest daughter. She got her first puppy, and she jokingly calls us dog parents. Well, we are hoping that, Lord willing, we'll be the real kind of grandparents before long. But for my daughter and other people in her generation, we recognize the pressures to be able to build the kind of income to sustain not only her own apartment as a single person, but again, hopefully before long, marriage and the blessings that come with that. And so this is sort of where we've been driven to as a society. And I believe that those attitudes, that the blame lies largely at the feet of the Federal Reserve.
Let's see. There are a whole bunch of things here. You use the term Cantillon effects in the book, which is, I would guess 25% of people listening to this already know what that means. But can you explain what that means and what that would have to do with this subject? Because it seems a little bit removed from it.
Mm-hmm. So the Cantillon effect is the effect that happens when you have new money brought into any system. And one of the great books on this, we actually have a translation of an essay in economic theory. So that book was edited by Mark Thornton at the Mises Institute, and you can get the PDF of that book for free. And you would want to go to section 2, chapter 6, and read up on this. And Cantillon gives a very straightforward example where you have new money created, even in a situation where you have gold or silver used as money. And he describes a one-time creation of new money. And what you have is that the minters, those who extract it and then mint it into money, they are the first beneficiaries in this process known as the Cantillon effect. And what are they able to do? Well, they're able, with this newfound wealth, to bid higher prices on everything from household goods to financial assets to property. The benefit to them is that they're able to purchase these assets and consumer goods while prices are relatively low. Now, after those purchases are made and you have this increased demand that comes from these folks, those prices will naturally tend to rise. Now, the recipients of those spending habits, those spending choices, will be sort of a second layer of beneficiaries, but they too are bidding prices up. So as time goes on and this new money makes its way through the expenditures of these households, you'll find that those at the very latest stages of new money moving through the economy are faced simply with the same wages that they've always had, but with rising prices and higher than they would have otherwise been. And so they wind up being those who get hurt by this process. And so the great thing about reading Cantillon is when he describes this process, he talks about it in household terms. He talks about those first recipients no longer purchasing beer and wool clothing, but now they're purchasing wine and fine linens and nicer furnishings for their homes. And when it gets down to those at the very end, they again are left with higher prices for the consumer goods that matter in their houses. And he even takes another step and says that these people may be forced to immigrate in order to keep up with new prices, immigrate perhaps to cities or to other countries where prices aren't quite so high. And so that's the long answer on what Cantillon effects look like. In the shorthand, as you said, kind of midwit version of this, it's where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. But there is a sliver of truth to this that we have to be aware of. And again, when Charles Murray was describing the world that he saw unfolding in Coming Apart, I think what he was actually describing over that 60-year period that he was detailing, really what he was describing is the outcome of Cantillon effects in American society, where those who have been harmed by inflation are not forming families. And if they are having children, they're not providing for them, hence his writing on the welfare state. And so that's Cantillon effects, but I want to bring it again to what it looks like in our world today. And I think Murray did that while not specifically citing monetary policy as driving what's happened.
So one of his points in that book is that if you're thinking that the problem with family breakdown is a matter of race and that it's like the, quote, the black family that's having this problem, he was showing that white families that are not financially well off are having the same problem. And so there is a distinct difference between the family experiences of rich and poor. And I like the humility of your book in that you are very quick to point out, I'm not saying the Federal Reserve is the only explanation for these phenomena, or even that in every case it's the driving force, but it is certainly giving additional heft, an additional push to existing trends. And so you could say there are a variety of trends that would tend to lead to lower family formation, later family formation, fewer children. Some of them are philosophical and ideological. And I would bet that some of them are cultural issues that are kind of unique frankly, to the underclass or to poor people. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of those people, I know for a fact, inherit really, really bad ideas about money and wealth creation. Right. So it wouldn't surprise me if they likewise are in a culture that disparages these other things.
Yeah, indeed. And one thing that I didn't explore a whole lot in the book, I touched on it, was the in-home financial habits that children learn. And of course, this can be repeated throughout several generations. And so among the poorer classes, what do we see? What is debt used for? Well, we've got situations now where buy now, pay later for fast food deliveries. I mean, this is credit to be used for everyday consumer goods. And of course, we could enumerate a number of different examples. And thinking through the world of financial advising, just the sort of pop financial advising, you have on one end of the spectrum, someone like Robert Kiyosaki, right? He famously points out that the wealthy use debt to leverage into assets and wind up better off. But how do the poor treat debt? Well, they treat it as a tool for consumption, and obviously this is a habit that, if followed over a couple of generations, can put you in the hole quite early. Now, it is interesting. I mentioned earlier how education markets, higher ed markets, have been fueled by credit expansion through the years. And for younger people who are coming from poorer backgrounds, of course, you have the sort of educational welfare state with Pell Grants and so forth on the one hand, encouraging young, poorer families to come into the education market, but they're also taking out these loans as well. And taking out loans at an early age over a couple of generations is really no big deal anymore. Whereas go to my grandparents' generation or your grandparents' generation, to take out debt even for a washing machine would have been borderline shameful and a very questionable thing to do, to purchase a semi-durable good, let alone purchasing your takeout. And so these habits, as they form among the lower classes, are hard to undo, hard to unteach. And so that's another reality that faces poorer families 15 and 20 years on, when those children are at an age where they might think about family formation, but find those opportunities and their financial well-being holding them back from making that decision. So indeed, those household habits are awfully important to point out. The literature on this was really spurred by a gentleman by the name of Campbell, and an article in 2006. And it has something like a couple thousand citations. So it's widely noted that household finance and the habits formed there are really instrumental in informing how young people think about the use of credit and other financial habits.
Hey everybody, quick message from Old Woods here. If you're watching me on video, look what I have in my hand. See? Look. See this? This is my 16-page print newsletter, the Tom Woods Elite Letter, that I mail in the physical mail to people who support the Tom Woods Show. That's one of the 800 zillion benefits you get as a supporter of the Tom Woods Show. And it's 100 octane woods. Now, don't write to me and say, well, that's actually not the correct usage of octane. Shut up. You know what I mean. It's full of hot, great, fantastic content, all original, nothing like my amazing email list, all fresh, new stuff that you've never read before, coming in the mail to you every single month. Isn't it nice every once in a while to read something not on a godforsaken screen? And is there any other content creator out there sending you a physical newsletter in the mail? I think the question more or less answers itself. But as a member of the Tom Woods Supporting Listeners program, you also get invites to my Christmas party every year, and also to my murder mystery dinner parties that I hold all over the United States. Everybody else has to pay hundreds of dollars to attend those, but not you, smart supporter. You get in for free. Not to mention, you get to join the Tom Woods Show Elite, where you can talk in my no censorship group to other normal people. Plus, you get transcripts of all the interviews I do and so many other goodies, you're going to feel like a kid in a candy store. So how do you get all these goodies, including, look at this thing. Look at this thing. Look, 16 pages. Look at this thing, all right? You get that every single month in your mailbox. How do you get all this stuff? Supportinglisteners.com. You've been thinking, maybe I should do that, right? Today's the day. I am the voice of that angel, the good, the good one that's telling you to do good things. That's me right now. So head over to supportinglisteners.com. Be a part of the greatest community in the world. Get more goodies than anybody's given you in the world, as well as my profound thanks.
By the way, why should we care about this subject? There are people who would say the patriarchal family is a wicked institution, and so anything we do to undermine it is a positive good. Now, I don't think most people are adopting that view, but all the same, what exactly is it about the family as a unit that we would focus on it and want to, it's absurd. Academia has forced me to ask this question. It's obvious you want to help the family,
Well,
but
right.
but unfortunately I'm surrounded by crazy people, and I want to at least ask you for that.
Yeah, you're not alone in that, Tom. And indeed, there are people of the Marxist fringe who have written books. One of my favorite targets is someone by the name of Sophie Lewis, who wrote a book literally called Abolish the Family. And of course, for the reasons you mentioned, we need to smash the patriarchy and so forth. Right. So setting those arguments aside, I think that the reason we need to be concerned about this is because children matter. Okay, if I could borrow a phrase, or children's lives matter. Let's put it that way, Tom. When it comes to a society that has any kind of future orientation, if we have any kind of humanity among us, then we need to set a brighter future for our children. And this seems to me that this is a natural motive. I mean, hasn't this been the chorus of generations past, that we want our children to do better than we did? We want them to be better off and to have a better experience than we had. And for by many surveys, by many measures, this generation of young people are facing a tougher future. And I think that this inflationary world that they have inherited is driving some of the difficulties that we've noted here. So why should we care? It's because I would like my children to have a better future, and not just my own, but especially those who are growing up in those lower middle class and poorer households that we've just described, where their parents are those who are the most harmed by inflation. So what happens though when children are born out of wedlock and are living in single family homes, perhaps are essentially being run by the welfare state and these other degradations? Well, we know that their criminality is at a higher rate. We know that the deaths of despair among those children is at a higher rate. We know that they're more likely to repeat these destructive behaviors in future generations. And so this is really a basic appeal to humanity for the future. And so I think when it comes to that question, why should we care about families? It's not so that adults can feel a sense of psychological fulfillment, which some other authors in the Austrian tradition, Steve Horowitz, a couple years ago, came out with a book called Hayek's Modern Family. And he said that, frankly, it's a wonderful blessing of liberty and wealth that adults get to form whatever kind of living arrangements they want because they can afford it. But there is so little that Horowitz touches on in his work on the impact on children. And we know, without getting into specifics, that there are certain household types where children suffer the things that I've mentioned earlier, but also suffer higher rates of physical and, God forbid, sexual abuse. Those numbers are there. And children are subjected to degradations that would be a lot less likely to happen in what you might call a traditional or even Christian type of household arrangement or marriage. And so that's a long way to say, why should we care? Because of kids. That's why we should care. And here, interestingly enough, you have this chorus of folks in the Trump movement who were highly motivated by things that, maybe were happening to certain children throughout the world. Won't get into the details of those speculations or those realities, whatever they might be. But if you really are concerned about children's futures, let's address this issue here and undo the interventions that have gotten us to this place.
You make reference to the concept of moral hazard.
Mm-hmm.
What does moral hazard have to do with this? How does the monetary system introduce it, and how does it hurt people?
Yeah, so moral hazard is any situation or incentive where we are encouraged to take greater risks than we otherwise would. And so there's a couple ways that this comes into play, and I've alluded to it a little bit earlier. But when we talk about the banking system overall, probably start there. Banks are brought into a moral hazard, heightened sense of moral hazard, because the Federal Reserve acts as a lender of last resort. In other words, they can act more recklessly than they otherwise would because they have a known backstop, someone to bail them out. Well, that's at the banking level. And so we know that banks will take more risks in their lending practices, driving this credit expansion that we've already described. So that's one way, but that's kind of high level. That's kind of in banking. So one area that I think, if I remember right, Tom, you're living in Florida, where moral hazard comes to bear, taking it one step further, is that banks are, as we said, induced to take greater risks than they otherwise would. One of those could include lending to more people to buy real estate in a state like Florida. Well, why not bring up Florida? Well, Florida is a state where historically, over the last few decades, where if you make an investment in a home, you are likely to see those high returns. All right. And so those high returns are very appealing, even though I might not be able to afford that house. It might be a real stretch for me, right? You hear the risk-taking language here, but I'm going to go ahead and dive into the Florida housing market. So maybe you do see those benefits, but what then happens in a state like Florida, where you've got a high-risk environment in terms of the weather? I'm not going to ask you details, but it's my understanding that to get home insurance in Florida is becoming a sort of an outrageous price and a big part of people's monthly payments on their homes. And so all of this risk-taking behavior poured into the state of Florida housing market through expanded credit markets, higher prices on those homes that emerge. You can see the risk and the financial fragility starting to build here. And then add to it one hurricane ripping through your town, and insurance markets go absolutely haywire and become unaffordable. So we see a lot like in the Austrian business cycle theory, a rush into certain assets and a cluster of error. You see kind of a society-wide rush into riskier and riskier assets that underlies housing bubbles, that underlies financial asset bubbles. So that's a longer tale to tell about how increased risk can lead to increased financial fragility, but we're taking risks that we otherwise wouldn't have if the credit expansion hadn't happened in the first place. So that's one long example, but there are others when it comes to moral hazard and people behaving in ways that they wouldn't otherwise. And hopefully that's a good one for the audience to understand. And I hope I didn't muddy the waters, but make that one a little more clear.
No, yeah, it was just because I think people can understand something like if I have a rental car, maybe now this isn't true of me, I don't think, but I think, and I don't think people actively think to themselves, "This is a rental car. I'm going to drive this thing around." But the point is, you don't get an oil change in a rental car. You figure, well, they'll take care of it when I return it, or you don't wash a rental car.
Yeah, you don't put premium gas in it, right?
You don't put premium.
Sure.
Although, you know what? I'm such a sucker, Jeff, that when I have a vehicle that requires it, I actually do.
Oh, well, you are an exceptionally thoughtful individual, Tom Woods. I knew that. A funny story in Auburn this last week. I had a rental car and was trying to figure out all the gadgets and gizmos a little different than my car at home, and I didn't turn on the lights properly at night, so I had a quick trip to make out from the Airbnb and had my first encounter with Alabama law enforcement. And I was struck with fear immediately, but he was quite a gentleman and understood the situation. So he let it pass. But you would be right. These are these situations where there's a backstop of some sort, and we're not as careful or as judicious with what we've got in our hands, whether it's a financial asset or a car. Based on this sort of backstop, right? I purchased the insurance. We're good. It's somebody else's.
Right. Yeah, because I don't bear the cost. So yeah. Mm-hmm. It wasn't obvious how that would apply to the family because of monetary policy. That's not obvious to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, that's why I like to go to that housing example, because there are several things that that build into that, and this will have implications. Yeah, we'll just stick with that Florida example. Now I'm a few years out from retirement, but what does retirement look like for me if Florida is not an option anymore? I know that after talking to David Howden and the wonders of southern Spain, that maybe my wife and I will look in that direction, because although Spain has had their own problems with an inflationary and then deflationary house market, maybe we'll be the beneficiaries of deflation in the housing market in Spain in a few years. It's nice place to live, from what I understand. Thank you.
So if it's a retirement destination, that's one thing. But my understanding is Spain is not very friendly to people who want to move there. That you'd have to make clear that you're not going to take a job from a Spaniard.
Yes. Those are fighting words. Words.
Yeah, exactly. I'd like to see a Spaniard who could do my job, but I don't even know what that means. All right, so the book we've been talking about is Inflation and the Family: Monetary Policy's Impact on Household Life. It is a book that obviously fills an important gap. No one's written on this. There have been hints about this topic in various books, and our friend Guido Hulsmann, whom you worked with, has talked about implications for household life, but a full-blown book-length study had not been done, to my knowledge, and now we've got it thanks to our guest, Jeff Degner. So, Jeffery Degner, thanks for your time today.
All right, thanks for having me, Tom. I appreciate it.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com, and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.